Saving home. Chapter 2. Joe Russell's apartment sat 14 floors above the Potomac. The apartment sprawled across half the floor, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures that the realtor had called authentic urban living. Joe had bought it for the privacy. No shared walls meant no neighbors complaining when he ran film at 2 a.m. or when his physical therapist showed up at dawn. The Grays had wrapped up their homestand that afternoon, a 4-3 nail-biter against Philadelphia that left his right shoulder screaming despite the cortisone shot he'd taken before first pitch. He dropped his equipment bag by the door, the leather thudding against hardwood. Everything ached, not just the shoulder, but exhaustion that came from squatting behind the plate for 9 innings in August heat. The living room opened before him, dominated by a 70-inch screen mounted on the brick wall. Game film paused mid-pitch, yesterday's loss to Miami frozen in high definition. He'd been studying Henderson's slider, trying to figure out why batters kept fouling it off instead of swinging through. The answer lurked somewhere in that footage, but his eyes hadn't found it yet. He moved to the kitchen, pulled a bag of frozen peas from the freezer, and pressed it against his shoulder. The cold bit through his shirt, better than the heat that radiated from the joint, the inflammation that ice baths and anti-inflammatories couldn't quite tame. His phone buzzed on the counter. Julie's face filled the screen, a photo from last Christmas, both of them wearing matching ugly sweaters their mother had knitted. "You look stiff in the 7th, she said without preamble. Joe wedged the phone between his ear and his good shoulder, shuffling toward the couch. "Hello to you two." That throw down to second barely made it. "You're hurting." "I'm fine." Liar. Her voice carried that mix of exasperation and concern that only a twin could manage. "How bad?" He sank into the leather cushions, adjusting the frozen peas. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city's lights blurred into abstract patterns. On a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a 6, which means 8 in Joe speak. "Jules, did you tell Brennan?" She meant the team's medical director. "Or are you doing that stupid masculine thing where you pretend everything's fine until something tears completely?" Joe closed his eyes. On the frozen screen, Henderson's arm hung suspended mid-delivery, the ball barely visible leaving his fingers. "If I tell them, I sit. If I sit, Dempsey starts, and the kid is not ready for a pennant race. And if you blow out your shoulder, I won't." "Because you're Superman?" "Because I'm careful." Julie's sigh crackled through the speaker. In the background, he heard the familiar sounds of her house, her husband Mike washing dishes, her daughter Emma practicing piano, hitting the same wrong note in Fur Elise repeatedly. "How's the slump?" Joe's jaw tightened. 3 for his last 27. The numbers scrolled through his head like stock tickers. His batting average had dropped 40 points in 2 weeks. "It's not a slump, right? Just a prolonged statistical anomaly. I'm seeing the ball fine, my timing off. Because of the shoulder? No. Yes, maybe. The shoulder changed his swing, forced him to compensate in ways that threw off 20 years of muscle memory. But admitting that meant admitting weakness, and weakness got you benched. Mom called," Julie said, changing tactics. "She wants to know if you're coming to Dad's birthday. That's 2 months away. You know how she is. She likes to plan." Joe did know. Their mother approached family gatherings like military campaigns, with spreadsheets and contingency plans. It was her way of maintaining control in a world that had taken her husband's steady factory job and replaced it with part-time work and medical bills. "I'll be there if we're not in the playoffs." "When?" "When you're in the playoffs." "Right." Emma's piano practice stopped. Julie's voice dropped lower. "You sound exhausted. It's part of the job." "No, this is different. This is that thing you do where you carry the whole team on your back and pretend it doesn't weigh anything." Joe shifted the frozen peas. Water condensation dripped down his arm. "Someone has to." "Is that just what you tell yourself?" Before he could answer, his doorbell chimed. He frowned at the security monitor on his phone. The concierge usually called before sending anyone up. "Hold on, Jules. Someone is at the door." He patted across the room, checked the peephole. A delivery guy stood outside, holding a plastic bag that smelled of cumin and chili through the door. "I didn't order anything," Joe called out. "Joe Russell? Order's already paid for. Guy said to tell you it's from Martinez. Freddie Martinez. The Grays' closing pitcher, currently nursing his own injury. A strained UCL that had him on the 60-day injured list." Joe opened the door and took the bag. Inside, he found enough food for 3 people, and a note in Freddie's terrible handwriting. "Stop living on protein bars. Real food helps healing. Trust me." "What is it?" Julie asked when he returned to the phone. Freddie sent arroz con pollo. "Good. You need actual meals, not those horrible shakes you drink." Joe unpacked containers on his coffee table. Enough rice to feed a small army. His stomach growled, reminding him he'd skipped lunch, survived on dugout sunflower seeds and Gatorade. "How's Emma's recital prep going?" "Changing the subject won't work, but it's fine." She's nervous. Keeps saying her fingers won't do what her brain wants. I know the feeling. Your fingers work fine. It's your brain that's the problem. You think too much. Joe stabbed a piece of chicken with a plastic fork. That's rich. Coming from someone who color codes her calendar. Don't diss my organization. You're doing that thing where you analyze every micro movement until you forget how to just play. The chicken was so spicy it made his eyes water. Or maybe that was exhaustion. He'd slept 4 hours last night, waking up every hour to ice his shoulder and to replay at bats in his head. The team needs me. The team needs you to be healthy. There's a difference. On the television, Henderson remained frozen. Joe knew if he pressed play, he'd see the slider break late, dive out of the zone. He'd see himself frame it perfectly, steal a strike. He'd see Henderson nod, that little gesture of trust between pitcher and catcher that made everything else worthwhile. Remember when we were kids? Julie's voice softened. That summer you broke your wrist and tried to hide it so you could keep playing Little League? That was different. How? I was 12, and you're still that 12-year-old who thinks the whole team will collapse if you're not there. Joe set down the food, his appetite now gone. Outside, a helicopter swept along the river, its searchlight painting circles on the dark water. Dempsey's not ready. His pitch calling is. Dempsey's fine. You've trained him well. You just can't let go. It's August. We're 2 games out of first, and you're 1 bad throw from ending your career. The words hung between them, carried by invisible signals bouncing off satellites. In Julie's house, Emma had returned to the piano, found the right note this time. I had another article published, Julie said, changing course. The Journal of Behavioral Psychology. Yeah? What about? Protective instincts in high-stress professions. How people in positions of responsibility often can't distinguish between necessary and destructive self-sacrifice. Subtle. I'm your sister. I don't do subtle. Joe's phone lit up with text messages. Brennan wanted to know about tomorrow's bullpen session. The pitching coach sent 3 videos of Atlanta's lineup. The general manager forwarded an article about trades, wanted Joe's input on a potential acquisition. They never stop, do they? Julie said. Season ends in October. Does it? Or does it just shift to different demands? Joe didn't answer. They both knew the truth. The season never really ended. October became November conditioning. November became December contracts. December became January training prep. The cycle spun endlessly, each revolution grinding away a little more cartilage, a little more peace. I should go, he said. Early batting practice tomorrow. With a shoulder that hurts at an 8? 6. Joe. I'm fine, Jules. Really. Another pause. Emma had moved on to scales, each note climbing higher. You know what I miss? Julie asked. When we used to just talk, not about injuries or slumps or the team. Just talk. What do you want to talk about? I don't know. Movies. Books. That weird neighbor you have who collects garden gnomes. Mrs. Anderson moved. New guy collects vintage baseball cards. Of course he does. Your whole building is probably baseball fans. Lawyers, mostly. One surgeon who works at George Washington. Yeah? What's she like? Joe thought of the woman he'd passed in the lobby last week. Severe ponytail, scrubs under a pristine white coat, eyes that looked through rather than at people. She'd been carrying a medical journal and a jar of peanut butter, an odd combination that had made him look twice. Intense. Pot. Meat kettle. I'm focused. There's a difference. Sure there is. Emma's scale stopped. Julie's husband said something about bedtime. Normal family sounds. The kind that filled spaces between conversations. I worry about you, Julie said. I know. Not about baseball, about everything else. About what happens when you can't play anymore. That's years away. Is it? Joe's shoulder throbbed in answer. The frozen peas had gone soft and were now useless. Tomorrow, he'd need another cortisone shot. It was another round of treatment that masked problems rather than solving them. I love you, Julie said, even when you're being stubborn and self-destructive. Love you too. Call Mom. I will. Liar. She hung up before he could protest. The apartment fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning, the distant murmur of traffic 14 floors below. Joe stood and walked to the windows. The city sprawled before him, lights marking lives in progress. Somewhere out there, Dempsey was probably studying film too, trying to prepare for the possibility of starting. The kid had talent and good instincts, but he was 23, still believed baseball was just a game rather than a war of attrition. His shoulder throbbed with each swallow. Tomorrow, he'd take another injection. Tomorrow, he'd crouch behind the plate and pretend his body wasn't betraying him. Tomorrow he'd call the pitches and frame the borderline strikes and protect his pitchers from their own worst instincts. He cleaned up the containers and turned off the film. His apartment stretched around him, expensive and empty. The walls held no photos, no personal touches beyond the books stacked on his coffee table. Mostly baseball biographies and technical manuals about pitch sequencing. In his bedroom, he opened the drawer of his nightstand. Inside, beneath now warm ice packs and prescription bottles, lay a different phone. His real personal phone, the one only Julie and his parents had the number for. It was switched off, had been for 3 days. 47 missed calls waited on it, all from his father, who wouldn't understand why Joe hadn't returned them. Joe knew he would want to talk about the team's chances, about that throw to second in the 7th inning, about everything Joe couldn't bear to discuss. The bed was a California king, too big for one person. He'd bought it during the optimistic phase after his last relationship ended, when he'd believed he might find someone who understood the schedule, the pressure, and the way baseball consumed everything until there was nothing left to give. He lay down fully clothed, didn't bother with the lights. Through the windows, the city pulsed with life. Somewhere, Dempsey was preparing to potentially start. Somewhere, 40,000 fans were checking tomorrow's lineup, wondering if their captain would play through the pain again. He would. He always did. His phone lit up with another message from the pitching coach. More videos. More analysis. More preparation for a game that would happen, whether his shoulder held up or not. Joe closed his eyes and tried to find a position that didn't hurt. The frozen peas had left a wet spot on his shirt. Everything smelled like a rose con polo and defeat. Julie was right. She was always right. But being right didn't change anything. The team needed him. Henderson needed him. The rookies looked to him for guidance, for the steady presence that said everything would work out. He'd call his parents tomorrow. He'd pretend his shoulder was fine. He'd crouch behind the plate and give the target and make baseball look easy, the way heroes were supposed to.